introduce you to Sita Brand from Settle Stories. Settle Stories is the most innovative charity based up in Settle. It is about storytelling. It's about communicating the power of words and the power of the mind. And Sita here has a formidable track record as a national storyteller. She was recently on Libby Purpose's midweek program talking about storytelling. She runs a festival that occurs every 2 years, and throughout the year, Settle Stories is putting on particular events. And you should go to the website, to settlestories.org.uk, and you'll see what events are going on throughout the year. We're not quite as big as the Harrogate Festival, but I think we're much more innovative. I'm very fortunate enough to be a trustee of Settle Stories, so I'm giving this plug because I think it's a great place, but I'm also full of admiration for Sita Brand. Sita here is a storyteller in her own right. She is a producer, she's a dramatist, and she's also a Northern board member for the Arts Council. So there's not much you don't know about, I think, about writing and about creativity, Sita. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I'm sure there's lots and lots I don't know, but I'd like to know a little bit more about, and I'm sure all of us would like to know, a little bit more about you and your process. And I wanted to start by first asking you, how did you come up with the idea for Windleton and the Bavarian incident, and also what drew you to writing about the 1960s?
Well, I'll answer the second question first, I think. I think this 1960s was a very, very interesting era, and lots of us here, I have to say, are baby boomers. Not everybody, but a lot of them are baby boomers, and so we were brought up in the 50s and 60s, and we were part of that 60s revolution. And really the book reflects, I think, what life used to be like, and particularly in small communities, where there was a social hierarchy, there was a pecking order, you touched your cap to the bank manager, you touched your cap to the lawyer and all the other people that were seen to be important in the town, and the mayor and the town clerk and all those other people. So I was fascinated about it because if you look back on that era, it is completely gone, really, and thank goodness. That sort of snobbishness and all that pecking order business, some of it exists, but it happened in all communities, I think, in Great Britain, not just in Yorkshire, where I was brought up. And people have said, well, you know, where is it based on Knaresborough, Dougie? Well, there's a bit of Knaresborough in it, there's a bit of Ripon in it, there's a bit of Skipton in it, there's probably a bit of Northallerton, and any other place that's like it, those little market towns. What was the first question?
So, it was about the idea for Windleton and the Bavarian incident.
Well, I always say that I'm not a person who can go to a pub and tell a joke, but I think I have an observational wit, and I can make asides, or I can sum people up or make a remark about somebody, which is often rather sarcastic. But I have this observational wit, and I thought that this period was very interesting because of those characters that have passed by. And I like small town life. I'm a Yorkshireman, although my father was brought up in the south of England, so I don't sound much like a Yorkshireman. But I'm a Yorkshireman through and through, and I loved living. And my upbringing in Knaresborough, I was delighted to live in a lovely place like that. It's a place and a time that has passed us by now, and so that love of Yorkshire, I think, came through, and that's probably why small town life was that.
So you had those ideas. You grew up in Yorkshire, and know a lot about small towns. So when you're starting to write about them, can you talk us through a little bit about how you brainstormed your ideas and your writing process?
Well, I'll tell you, when I write something or other, I sit at the pad. When I started writing off the Windleton Absurdities, it was actually called Hidden Lives, I changed the name, but the Windleton Absurdities, I didn't know where it was going to go. I genuinely didn't know. I go back for my school days. I was lazy at school, pretty thick, but the only thing I was any good at was writing stories. And I was encouraged to write stories, and I remember as a small boy at my junior school, the master used to say, oh, Adamson's written one of his stories again. And so I used to read them to the class. I was obviously becoming a complete big head even then, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and the children, my fellow colleagues who were listening to it, seemed to enjoy it as well. And I think that's where that started off, that idea of writing. And I do love the written word, and I read a lot of books. So
you enjoy writing. So say a little bit more about how you developed your characters. Did the characters just come to you, and as you wrote, new characters arrived, or did you consider them, or did you think about the people around you? How did you develop the characters?
The characters started, I think, as a young man, before I worked in advertising marketing, when I went in at about age 20, when I was 17, I worked for 2.5 years in a bank. And there the social hierarchies were very much in place, and there are scenes from the first book, particularly going into the cellar in the morning and getting the money out of the cellar and loading the money onto a trolley and putting it into a lift, were exactly taken from that experience. But the characters there always used to make me, I shouldn't do it. I was always laughing and giggling, doing things I shouldn't have done, really. I can't say there was a bank manager there who I thought was going to rob his bank. There was one particular bank I did work in where I think the manager was having a bit of a doings with his secretary, and I still remember when a rather irate husband turned up in the branch one day. I won't say where that was or who it was. The person has probably long since died, but there were scenes, put it that way.
So, as you were writing and coming towards the end of and particularly the second book, did you come across any specific challenges? What were the difficulties that you had as you talked before a little bit about the support you've had in terms of structure, but what were the challenges that you had in writing?
There's two key things. Writing the second book was easier because the characters were formed. One of the things that was very important is trying to keep the characters in character, and they don't run out of character. You know, if somebody's going to behave in a particular way, they have to be consistent about behaving in that way. So that is a very big challenge. And in terms of coming to the end of the book, you know, I got to a bit of a stage where I was writing this thing and I had to finish it. And I didn't start off, the second book, I had an idea what would happen probably towards the end. But some writers, I think, actually do have a plot and a plan, and they say that's going to happen and that's going to go and that's how it's going to end up. It never is quite that way for me. I sit literally, I often used to handwrite it first and then I put it into the computer. Now I go straight into the computer. But it literally just comes into my head. And people have said it to me before, how do you do that? And I just don't know. I've been blessed. It's a bit of magic I've got in my life that ideas come into my head and I manage to put them down.
And did you think about any kind of alternative endings or different ways of things going?
No, not particularly. When I got to the idea, I can't give the details about what happens in the second book, the end of it away, because it spoiled it for everybody. But no, I didn't have it, and it was quite a useful way of actually concluding that book. But it's meant to be a trilogy, so I've written 2 of the books, and so... So
when you think about the characters, is there a character that you have as a favourite? Is there one you would like to take to a desert island with you, and why?
That's a very difficult question, actually, Sita. In the first book, they're all horrors, to be quite honest with you, but in the second book, I think a lady called Hermione, who is a nurse to Jasper Inchdale, who's nursing him back to good health, and she seems to be the only person in the book that really has any worth about her. She's caring. She's obviously very beautiful, and she's a Scottish lass, and there's nothing nicer than a Scottish lass. And I'll say that even about my daughter-in-law too. But there is nothing better than a Scottish lass. So I think on the desert island, I'd have Hermione with me.
Okay.
I think she'd look after me. I think.
Now you spoke earlier about the fact that you really you read a lot, and you liked writing ever since you were a child. Can you tell us who your favourite authors are?
Well, I've had a series of them, really, and I thank again an English master at school, in my secondary school, because one of our set books was Scoop by Evelyn Waugh, and I love that book. I love the dry humour. Evelyn Waugh writes very beautifully too. I read all his other books. I love Decline and Fall. They had this very dry, anarchic humour. He was also sending up the upper classes as well in a very, very funny way. He was a roaring snob, I think, Evelyn Waugh, but his books are very, very funny. I love him, but alternatively, I love Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22, which again is an entirely anarchic book. I probably read that book about 4 times. The only book I've probably read 4 times. But more current books, I mean, people like William Boyd and, Every Human Heart is a fantastic book, and Birdsong and other novels like that I do read. I've always got books on the go. Frasner's a very interesting writer. He is, I think, American. I think Piers will put me right on that. Is that right? Frasner? Cranston, and whatever. So those are the more modern ones. But those, I think they were big influences. The other thing was, my brother Neil, who's here tonight, was at Leeds University in the 60s, and he brought Private Eye home with him. And I started reading Private Eye, I was about 10, I think. And of course, in those days, Peter Cook, that lovely black comedian, you could get nobody with a darker sense of humour than Pete Cook. He wrote a lot of the articles and the funny articles in Private Eye. I've still got these, and Neil will probably claim, you've got to give me those back, Doug, because they're worth a fortune. But I've read Private Eye all my life. I still subscribe to it. And I also like that anarchic sense of humour that is in there. And of course, I was in the era of growing up with Monty Python and all those other people, and now we've had League of Gentlemen and Peep Show, which is the modern forms of humour, which I find very amusing, what have you.
Well, it's good to know a little bit more about you as being a trustee on Settled Stories. I didn't know about your interest in anarchic humour. Is there something else that you are really good at that few people here might know about?
I dread to say, really, but anyhow. No. Probably lots of people wouldn't understand me. People would know me as a countryman because I quite like going fishing and things like that. But actually, I have been, since a young age, a very keen bird watcher. And I was influenced by John Robinson's parents, who are here, who are great friends of my family. Joy and Gerald Robinson, they were keen bird watchers. And as a small child, their son was my best friend, and we used to go to the Farne Islands and places like that. And I always loved being in the outdoors, and I loved nature as a kid. And bird watching is something that has remained with me. I'm very pleased to say that Safi, my elder daughter, has just become very keen on bird watching. I bought her some new binocs. And that's something which is nice wherever I go. And Sarah says, how the hell do you know the name of that bird? I said, well, I don't know. It just I saw it sometime, or I've known it. So I'm also a keen bird watcher, which a lot of people say, really?
And
as opposed to a drinker.
That's good. And finally, returning to the book, Windleton and the Bavarian Incident, can you give us an interesting, fun fact about it before we send people off to buy the book?
I think I've said what the fun fact is, that the fun fact about the Windleton and the Bavarian is I never knew what was going to happen with it, really. I had no idea at the start of that book how it was going to end up and where it would go. And it does weave a lot. My wife very kindly said to me when she finally finished reading it a short while ago, she said, God, Dougie, you do tell a damn good story. And I think that's all I can say. It's a damn good story, and it's a bit curious, and I have a wacky sense of humour, and it's a bit bonkers in places, but I haven't got any other facts other than that. It's just plain bonkers, really.
And on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.